Good morning. Here it is, December 21st, 1997, approximately, I'd say 9 o'clock in the morning. And I am so excited this morning. It's an exciting day for me. Why? Because for the past, I'd say many years, I was going to say 35 years ever since I've been involved, but I really didn't start thinking of doing a video of this type till maybe past 30 years or so. But anyway, what I wanted to do is to make a video and put together things that have happened during my 35 years with the Safety Town program and child safety. Not from the standpoint of explaining about the program, that background, because that I did in 1986 in a video which I'm going to call video number 1. And I hope to eventually take some of this information, maybe take all this information, and insert this into that video and make it one nice video, professionally done, and have a script written. But right now I'm going to do it my way. Frank Sinatra saying, do it my way, and explain some of the many fun situations and many fun times I've had, many sad situations, unfortunate situations with people, with children. The children ones are usually fun, but they're sad when they have a sad story in the family of maybe not being understood properly or child development problems. But I just thought it would be interesting for several reasons, and for myself mainly, because hopefully the good Lord will bless me and I can live for many years, and in my old age in a rocking chair I can look back and see some of the things that I did and some of the wonderful people I've met. But also for my children, more so for my grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and also from anyone who is interested in Safety Town, child safety, as to how it evolved, what we had to, and I say we, I mainly mean myself and my husband to a certain extent, but since he was at the universities and working and very involved in organizations, I encountered a lot of things that he probably doesn't even know about. He'll probably learn about many of these things on the videotape. But I just thought it would be interesting to find and to have some of this background, especially for people in future child safety. I know the difficult time that I had trying to obtain preschool child safety information in those days. And believe me, there was nothing available. Yes, there were some things available in nursery schools where a teacher would make stop signs with a tongue depressor in the stop sign and take a milk carton box and make a traffic light. We did all that in nursery schools. But as far as having a curriculum based on child development, and that's really was my focus, what could children handle at certain ages, and what situations could they handle. And so hopefully, as I said, this will be a resource film as well as an entertaining educational film. Now, I do want to state that during my 35 years giving presentations and all, I don't ever remember reading a script. I couldn't read a script. I would just make a few notes, as I have here a few notes, and it would give me just the idea for that recall system to trigger in and start working, and then I'd be able to expand upon that. And of course, as I said, the hundreds and hundreds of seminars, meetings, workshops that I presented, I don't think I ever presented the same thing twice, because it always triggered something different, and of course the audience participation was always different, and that's what excited me and probably kept me going for these 35 years in child safety. Now, I'm going to, as I said, I never did that, except, I have to say, with the exception of once. I think it was in Washington, D.C. or Baltimore, Maryland, I can't remember which. There were 2 times that we had to present information, scientific information, to the subcommittee of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration for people in Washington. One time, the first time I went, and the second time Bill Wallace went, who worked for me for about 5 years, and I can't recall. One was in Baltimore, and one was in Washington, and I don't know who went where, but I went once and he went once. But anyway, I had to speak from a written presentation, and it was very, very uncomfortable for me, and I did not like it. So that's why I've always used note system. Okay, so I'm going to refer to back here just once in a while to my notes to make sure I'm covering on the topics that I need to do. And I think so far I've covered all this. Now, I've been working on this particular segment. I had to go through the past 3 months, I would say at least 6 or 8 Xerox boxes that I've had in my home, some in the office in Beechwood, that where I just threw notes and letters into the boxes, fun notes and personal notes, some business things. Most of the business things I kept in files at the office, but when we first started and we worked out of the house and then out of the apartment and then out of a small office again, everything was just pretty much thrown in different boxes. So I said, I'm going to take my time now. We came down here to Florida on October 1st, October 2nd to be exact, and I said I'm going to take my time and go through these papers. So I literally had to go through each piece of paper this way, and find the dates and put it in sequential order from 1963 to the present. So that's what I've been doing for 3 months, almost daily, many, many hours. So, and that's where I'm going to start from day one, from 1963. Okay, before I do, I'm going to stop and take a drink of my Diet Coke. And it's from my Dorothy cup. Okay, and I should read this, what it says to you. Someone gave this to me, and I thought, I can't recall who. I think I got an exchange. It says, Dorothy, distinctive and delightful too, original in all you do, reliable through thick and thin, outgoing, kind and true, you'll win. Thanks for all the love you share, happiness and joy to spare. Your talent is beyond compare. I like it. Okay, here we go. I'll put this paper down here because I think, well, I'll put it up here so I can refer to it. As I said, 1963 is when I became interested in child safety. One of the reasons was that we lived in Bedford Heights in an area where there were no sidewalks, and we lived on a street that curved around, and we were at the top of the hill, and as it curved around, it went down to a hill. So at the top of the hill, you really couldn't see the bottom of the hill or the curve. And we had some neighbor children, 3 nice, very little girls, the Pace girls, if I recall. And they would tie a jump rope to this stop sign that was across the street, and I think there was a curb sign. They would tie that jump rope, and they would jump rope across the street as you were coming down this curve, and this frightened me to no end. So many of the parents in our neighborhood worked. 2 parents both worked. Fortunately, I did not work. My husband was at Case Western Reserve in chemistry at the time. So I really started nursery school in the house. Later on, worked at the Bedford Co-op nursery part-time. And I say worked, and it was all volunteer. We did not get paid for that. That's when it's a co-op, you don't get paid. But anyway, many of the children, I would have 6 to 8 children at a time in my house, in my yard. We'd play different games. I really set up a schedule of activities for the children. And I remember, and I'm sure Tammy and Lynn will remember also, I planted a bush about 3/4 of the way down our driveway. Our house was set back about 100 feet from the street, so I had a little room to work with. And we planted that bush, and all the kids were instructed when they played in our yard, they were only allowed to go to that bush and could not enter into the street, which was hard for some of them, but they followed the rules. They would go to their house and play in the street, but never in our house, never in our yard. Well, around that bend down at the corner of the hill, a little girl by the name of Kathy Varney lived there with her parents and her brothers and sisters. And one day we heard a lot of screaming. We were outside and we heard a lot of screaming with the kids. And they said, there's a fire and Kathy's on fire. We went down there, some of the adults, and there was Kathy Varney on fire. They'd been playing with matches in the backyard, among the trees, and I guess some of the old leaves, or however it caught. We really weren't quite sure. But here she was, from her neck to her ankles, burned, very badly burned. Some of the adults just took and put a sheet around her because she was just completely on fire. That poor little girl stayed in the hospital for several months, had several surgeries. The family wasn't wealthy, of course. None of us were in Bedford Heights. So, as president of the JCS, I'm proud to say one of my many accomplishments with that particular organization was that we were able to raise quite a bit of money to give to the Varney family to help pay for the bills. And also, we purchased for this little girl, and this is a picture of this darling little girl, we purchased a raincoat for which she needed, her mom said, and a little stuffed animal. So this was really the start of my concern into child safety. After that, approximately a week or so after that incident, I remember my husband and I staying up till approximately, I would say, 3:30 at night. And what triggered the conversation was he was putting together a list of all the materials that he wanted to order for the students at Case Western Reserve for their chemistry classes. And I don't know what made me say it, but I said, honey, my kids are never going to get to your chemistry class. They're going to be killed. They're going to be injured very seriously. They're just not going to make it to get to college. And I said, we have to start teaching them at an early age about child safety. Why? So we don't have more Kathy Varney situations. And he agreed. I don't know whether he agreed just to have me shut up so he could go to bed, but he agreed. So then a few weeks after that, I attended a meeting in Lakewood, Ohio, because I was president of the Bedford Preschool PTA. And I attended a meeting and I inquired as to any child safety and preschool information available for children, any nursery schools. Were there any nursery school teachers in attendance? Since this was a preschool PTA, were there any safety chairmen from other organizations and other communities that knew of materials, coloring books or whatever? And no one knew of anything other than, as I said, a few teachers that said, well, in class we make popsicle sticks and tongue depressors and all those kinds of things, which we knew. But there wasn't anything, really there was not even a preschool coloring book available. So, after the meeting, one lady came up to me and said there was a program years ago in Mansfield, Ohio that she recalled. She was an elderly lady, but very, very nice. She said she recalled a program in Mansfield, Ohio that a policeman taught children about safety. I said, oh, that's great. Maybe I can follow up and get some information. So I started talking with my husband and the school board people about doing a child safety program. Of course, there wasn't a great deal of enthusiasm at the beginning. They didn't really get excited because you have to remember this was a time when many, many, many school systems across the country did not even have a kindergarten. It was not required. Many of them didn't even offer it. So first grade was the first involvement children had with school systems. So what I was talking about was something totally, totally new to them. And foreign, I must say, to many of them. But anyway, I went to Mansfield, Ohio. Took a few of the teenagers down with me because we'd already been in the organizational stage of the program. Went down there to meet with anyone. I met with the police department, and I said, I'm trying to find information about something that was done here years ago, a Safety Town program. And I talked to the current man, and he said, gave me some information. In fact, he gave me a couple of sheets of paper that had a theme of the day and so forth on it, but nothing concrete. It just said, Monday, policeman is your friend, Tuesday, crossing streets. And I said, well, what do you do during that time? And he told me it was a 20-hour program, and it was for 2 hours a day. And he said, you play games and whatever. And I said, well, sort of vague to me, but I took whatever information he gave me. And then he told me that Fred Bowles, who originally started Safety Town in 1937, after a little girl was killed in Mansfield in 1936, and again, this is on the tape number 1, so I'm not going to duplicate a lot of that, but I'm going to make reference to video tape number 1 periodically whenever I feel it's appropriate, so that it will remind us where we can insert different things into this video, or combine both of them into one video, but this will be one place where we will be able to do that. But anyway, he told me to talk with Fred Bowles' wife, who was still in Mansfield, which I did. Talked to her. She was very, very nice. And also talked to their son, who was a police officer. They later moved to Florida, and I later went to visit them there as well. After that, I went to visit. She told me that the police officer that worked with Fred Bowles was Officer Tom Hempfield, Hempfield. So I went over to visit Tom Hempfield, and also he had passed away, but his son and wife were there and were very, very cordial to us. Showed me lots of information. In fact, let me show you this information here so you know what I'm talking about. This is Tom Hempfield's son and Tom Hempfield's wife. They were sitting with a picture that the son made of the father, which was very, very nice. I'll pass these on. This is their house where they lived and we visited. They were very, very cordial to show me some of the scrapbook that his dad had. And this is a beautiful portrait. I think this is a better picture. This is a beautiful portrait that Tom Hempfield Jr. did of his dad as a police officer, which is just beautiful. Okay, so then we came back and we finalized the program. I found out that there was a program in Maple Heights, Ohio that started in 1962, and there was one in Sandusky that started, I can't recall when, I think in the late 50s, one in Lakewood, Ohio. So there were approximately, in 1964, and I didn't know this at the time, but I found out later, after my years of traveling, that in 1964 there were approximately 12 safety towns in operation throughout the country. Now, this is very important because as we progress through this video and through the years, you'll see how with a little bit of excellent publicity and a lot of hard work, we were able to increase that very rapidly within a short period of time. But I did want to put that figure out because a lot of people don't understand how the growth, or they think since it started in 37 that since we now have here in 1997, we had over 1,000 programs in the United States and in approximately 50 and 32 other countries. They think it all developed from 1937, and it didn't. And I want to be fair in giving credit to Fred Bowles and Tom Hempfield and all the people involved there, but I also want to be very fair to all of our people from 1964 on. Oh, just hundreds and hundreds of people, as you'll hear and see later on, who have helped to get this program where it is today. So this is why we used 1964 as what we call the new concept of Safety Town, because the one previous to that was just a traffic program and my concern was teaching total safety to the children. Fire, playground safety, home safety, and again, this is explained on the video, number 1. Here are a few pictures. I hope as the next year goes by that I'll be able to find more pictures. I know there are many more boxes in the office, and also the office at Beechwood and our office at home in the garage. And I have the whole garage is full of boxes. We've never put our cars in for several years. And we have another office, a bedroom, which is turned into an office in our home. And I have many, many things in there. But as we go through, I'll get more pictures, and as I said, we'll insert these all. But the few pictures that I have of my teaching Safety Town with the kids, here's one where I'm teaching the children in Bedford, and this is in 1965, teaching the children why you don't run into the street after the ball. We're demonstrating this to the children on Safety Town. And there I am. Also, this is 1965. Please note how young I look, a great comparison. And this is with a group of the students at a house. This is also 1965. This is one of the great instructors that I had for several years, Peggy Randall. Not only were my instructors helpful in teaching the children, but they helped in painting the houses and doing any number of things that had to be done. Great, great teenagers. In 1965, my husband, he had been involved in JCs for quite a while, and he went to Chagrin Falls, I believe, to one of their meetings, and there he met a gentleman by the name of Barnes Taft, and he was a descendant of one of the Taft family members, and he was a member of the Taft family, I should say. And my husband explained to Barnes about Safety Town program. And fortunately, Barnes took the ball and ran with it, and of course we helped. And this was in the newspaper shortly after, where Chagrin Falls, through the help of my husband and myself, started a Safety Town. So we were excited about that. Now I also hope to make a video number 3, which is going to consist of pictures, mainly pictures, and newspaper articles of various, hopefully of as many safety towns. I wanted to say all safety towns, and I don't think that's going to be possible, but as many safety town programs and safety villages and safety cities, because there are spin-offs, that we have in the file. I'm going to go through, starting with Alabama, and go through alphabetical order and take each file and show pictures of people who've been involved, who started the program, and again some background. So that's going to be a fun project also. And again, the reason I'm doing that is I feel that down the road, you never know, a grandchild might see the video not knowing that their grandmother or grandfather were very instrumental in doing a very good program for their community. Now, one of the problems that we faced in dealing with teaching aids and visual aids for children, as I said, which no videos, whatever, no videos weren't available. They were movies, 16mm movies at the time, or slide presentations, or overhead projectors is what we used in the classroom. In years to come, this is going to sound like really old antique materials, but that's the way it was. Now, we were fortunate to hear about a movie that was made about strangers. And in 1967-68, the stranger situation was becoming very, very important to the parents. We had not really been that concerned because the situation just hadn't been as large as it was becoming in the mid and late 60s. So thanks to a company called Marathon Oil, they made a 25-minute movie on strangers. The unfortunate situation there was that the movie covered everything from young children to teenagers going door to door selling Girl Scout cookies. Now, what was wrong with that? Well, it didn't keep the attention of the small child. And of course the older child got bored with the younger information. And no one was involved, obviously, from child safety in putting the movie together, or from even child development for that matter. But I did show the movie at Safety Town, and I did recommend it to other safety towns. And the reason I did, from that 25-minute movie, there was about a 5-minute segment that was just excellent for this age group. And I wanted to splice it and just show that segment, but people said you don't want to mess with a copyrighted movie. And of course I didn't know anything about copyrights and registration at the time, so I just showed the whole movie. And actually, throughout the parts of the movie, since brothers and sisters did watch the movie with the children later on, I thought they might pick up some information. But during the actual viewing of the Safety Town children, remember these are usually 4.5, 5.5-year-old children. Throughout most of the movie, they would talk to each other and sort of look around because it was not interesting to them. Not only from the fact that it was older children, but the terminology was way over their head. Now you have to remember, again, when we're dealing with this age child, the 4.5, 5-year-old, the terminology of a child, the vocabulary, is about 1/3 developed of that of an adult. So when you're making a movie for that age child, you have to keep that in consideration. And these people did not do that. And it's nothing against them. I'm sure the research was not available. I know the research was not available at that time because research was done much later in life. So during that 5 minutes, the actual segment was just wonderful because the music became very scary in on the audio version of the movie. And I can recall a car was coming around the corner and the little girl was walking, and the man would pull the car over to the curb and call the girl over to the car. And it was a slow process, and it was, as I said, very, very exciting. And many of the children, and I observed the children many, many, many times in many classes, and at the point where the man would call the girl over, the children who were sitting on the floor, in my classes anyway, would stand up and yell at the screen, "Don't go with him, don't go with him, he's a stranger." And I thought that was so great that if that little part got a message across, then I would show the movie. But as I said, we had to use anything we could get because it wasn't available. But these people were so nice. In addition, they made a coloring book which we gave to each child. And here it is, The Riddle of the Friendly Stranger. And you'll see here's the first picture. It was a small coloring book. Now here was another segment of the ice cream situation where the Good Humor people, or whatever company it was, and we wanted to make sure children knew about that. And again, that was geared mainly for a little bit older child, but because at this age, most of the kids who were 4.5 and 5 would go out with their parents. Not too many times would they go out by themselves, as this one is showing. Okay, and there was a dot to dot, and again, this is very nice, but this one up to numbers of 15. At that age, you don't have too many children that can do that one. Usually dot to dot at that age, at that time, was from 1 to about 20 or so. Now here's one that should have not been in, but because I don't think this relates to young children, it shouldn't. Going to the public restroom by yourself. Young children should not do that, even today. But they have it here with no adult and not talking to strangers when you're going to the public restroom. They should always be accompanied by a parent, even beyond that age, even until they're 8 or 9, 10 years of age. And of course, here's the stranger situation that I was talking about. And this one is finding the best route home, which you could work with the children on. Okay. Now, during those days, it was almost impossible. No, I'm going to almost change it and say it was impossible to get anyone from the media, any form of the media, newspaper, radio, television, to do any type of safety story. I mean, this was not only my opinion, but later on when I started to work with the president of the National Safety Council, and president of various organizations. They were just amazed and wanted to know how I obtained so much coverage for Safety Town. There were several reasons for that, which we'll discuss a little bit later, but the first radio program that I was able to do was in Cleveland, Ohio, and it was as a result of knowing someone in the television industry, but not as a result of safety, but as a result of the fashion industry. I had worked, prior to getting involved in education, I had worked with Helene St. Andrews for approximately 2.5 years. She was fashion director of the Higby Company, a beautiful department store. And I was fortunate to be her assistant to the director. And officially it was known as a secretarial category, but I don't think I typed 2 letters a month in there. My role was really to work with her. She would work on the theme of the day. She was a former dancer, entertainer in New York, did several shows, and was just the most elegant lady, very attractive, spoke beautifully, carried herself well. Anytime she walked in a room, everyone just looked at her because she was just a perfect lady, and I admired tremendously and really was my mentor in many, many ways. Just a wonderful lady. But she would plan a theme of the day for the fashion show, whether it be in the store, out of the store, whether it was a nautical theme or whatever. And she would select the items, the clothing, and then I would go throughout the store and accessorize and get gloves and hats and so forth. And I went to work every day with hats and gloves, and it was very nice. Those were really I would say the rules of the day. They were kind of the rules for Helene, but that was the way we dressed in the mid-60s. Hopefully I find some pictures of those to add here. But I had the opportunity to work with many fashion designers. Sally Victor, hat designer, was one, and many of the fashion designers that I can't think of offhand. But I accompanied them to television and shows and radio programs and so forth. And Alice Weston was one of these people. She later did her own radio program, and I talked with her about possibly doing a segment on Safety Town, which she did for us. And here, this was in 1968, 67, 68, I'm not sure, we don't have the date on the back of this one. This is Alice Weston and myself, and we were actually interviewing a little boy who'd gone through Safety Town. This poor little boy had to sit on about 4 or 5 telephone books to get on the chairs to reach the microphone. His name was Billy Soam, who went through the program, but his parents and were very good friends with Frank and I, and also their children were friends. Billy, Mike, and Pamela were played with Tammy and Lynn, our 2 children. But and Adele later went on to, they were always involved with the Safety Town program and worked very closely with us. And Pamela as well was an instructor and taped our segments for us on cassette tape. Did lots of work. But this was the first radio program that we did, and very exciting for us. Now, in 1968, as I stated in video number 1, I formed a Safety Town Council. The purpose of that council was to get the coordinators of the various programs in Greater Cleveland, and we had approximately, I would say 25 or so at this time in 1968. Not quite that many, maybe about 20 in Greater Cleveland. And I felt it was time for us to get together and meet and discuss what we were doing so we could upgrade the program. Because some of the things I was hearing, I was not very pleased with. I went to visit some of these programs that we were helping to set up, but again, you can set up the program, but you can't really control it unless you have a large staff, which we didn't. But I went to a few safety towns and found children being punished for unusual reasons, being in corners because they couldn't make the right and left turn signals, and I saw no value of that because they're certainly not going to be out in the street making left and right turn signals on their little tricycles. So we ran into some problems, and I thought, let's have a meeting and let's start getting together and discussing these. So we formed the council, and as I said, this is one of the few times I'm going to read the purpose of the council. The rest of the information about the council is on the other video. The purpose of the Safety Town Council, and as I said, this is what I wrote because this is what I felt we should accomplish through this organization. The purpose of this council is to acquaint each safety town director with new ideas and situations which can be most beneficial to each individual safety town. Most of the discussion at these meetings will probably center around the safety of the children, but financing, procurement of equipment, sponsorship, and choosing a good location are also of major importance and should be discussed to aid those considering a safety town program. We wanted to get in new people as well as the old ones. The free exchange of questions, answers, and successful ideas can be a tremendous help in the early stages. And boy, did I know how true that was. It should be pointed out that what has worked for one community might not work in another community. You can be right next door. Communities can border each other. One can have a lot of railroad problems, the other one a lot of water problems, such as swimming pools and some lakes. So you have to really gear the program. Through these discussions and exchanges of ideas, each director can better judge what is appropriate for their community. Each community has its own distinct schedule and methods. However, the majority of traffic situations are very similar throughout the nation. Together at these council meetings, we can discuss these situations and better improve the techniques used in presenting them to the children. Now you have to remember that this was back in 1968. I was working with the AAA, and I had to make sure that our comments were all geared to traffic safety, even though our individual programs did talk about home safety, fire safety, and all forms of safety. Education, as we all know, has advanced so rapidly, especially the past few years, that we must always be alert as to new ideas and teachings in order to achieve 100% effectiveness of Safety Town. I look upon Safety Town as a child's first and most important formal type of education. Safety for himself and others, as well as respect for the police officer. Excuse me, I have to say policeman. That's what it was at that time. We changed it later. For the policeman, firemen, vehicles, and the law. If this respect is taught at an early age, maybe then the teenage driver will better understand how important it is to handle that wheel properly. Safety is the most important part of Safety Town, but we must remember it also has many other educational benefits. Learning to take instruction, following direction, bathroom methods in groups, taking turns in play and learning, classroom manners, and numerous others. Now you have to remember, back in those days, there weren't many children that went to nursery school because, as I said, kindergarten wasn't a requirement, wasn't even offered in many, many communities, so it was first grade. So when we're getting these children in 4 and 5 years of age, they weren't exposed to large group situations other than playing with their neighbors' children in their own community. And if they lived in an area where they didn't have a lot of children, these children were just very, very difficult. It was very difficult for these children to work with groups. I could tell you, and I'll probably do this on video number 3, tell you of various situations where children came to class the first day and didn't want to leave. Didn't want to leave mom or dad. They were just afraid. And that's because they did not have the exposure. The instructors are the most essential part of the program. It is they who spend the majority of the time with the children and must present their comments and explanation properly to these children. They must be well trained and prepared for this responsibility. I used to put a great deal of emphasis on that. We must make the community fully understand the many facets of the program. Sending reports to civic organizations, Board of Education, putting good publicity in the newspaper. The local papers would carry safety stories if you could involve people in the community, such as giving an award to the superintendent of schools or the police chief. And in many ways, that's how we started getting newspaper people involved. Only in this way can the community know the contributions this program can give to our citizens. So that was the start of, that was the first paper I'd ever prepared as far as making a speech. Of course, I didn't know that that was going to be the start of writing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages for foundations and grants and for different types of newspaper publicity. I do want to go back just a minute here and tell you a cute story, because I said this is going to be fun, have some fun stories as well. When I was starting Bedford Safety Town, I had to obtain $75 to get a traffic light. There was a man in Elyria, someone told me, who made portable traffic lights. So I needed $75. Now in 1964, this was a lot of money. Still is, I guess, in some areas. But I did not, the PTA did not have the money. We didn't know how to go about raising the money for it other than selling cookies and so forth, and we'd just gone through some of that, and the PTA members just said we can't do any more fundraising, and our people have just done too much lately. So someone said, go to the Rotary Club in Bedford. So I went to the Rotary Club. I contacted them first and asked them if I could come and speak to them about a program we were going to do in Bedford, and Dr. Brown, I believe, our superintendent of schools, I believe, was a member of the Rotary Club. If not, he knew someone there to get me in. Anyway, we arranged a meeting, and it took me 2 weeks. I talked in front of my mirror at home in the bathroom for at least 2 weeks, rehearsing my speech. As I said, I wrote it down, and I kept trying to remember it and recall it, and I'd look and look up. And so I took it with me, and I went to the meeting. It was a luncheon meeting. It was at the Gaslight Inn on Broadway in downtown Bedford. It was downstairs, and of course, almost all the men smoked at that time, and I never smoked. A smoke-filled room, and I went down there, and I was the only lady at this meeting for a luncheon meeting. So I ate lunch, and of course, very nervous. The stomach was going, and the heart was pounding. So they finally had me come up and explain the program. And I had, I think, about 10, 15 minutes. And I was so involved in explaining the program, and I happened to look up, and there was a large clock in the back, which I noticed when I went up to talk what time it was. And I'm looking up, and I said, oh, my time is almost running out. To myself, I'm saying my time is almost running out, and I haven't talked about why I came here. I need $75. So I said, gentlemen, I need $75 for a traffic light, and I'm going to get that money one way or the other. Well, these men started to laugh, and I had no idea what they were laughing about, because what I was thinking in my mind is that if they're not going to give me the money, I'm going to go to the JCs or Kiwanians, or I'll go to another organization. But because I was pressed for time, I just said, gentlemen, I came for that money, and I'm going to get it one way or the other. And as I said, they chuckled, and then I got embarrassed when I realized what I had said, and I ended my presentation somehow. I can't recall because I was so embarrassed. But they wrote a check. The treasurer wrote a check right at that meeting and gave me the check. And I was so excited that I went back home and I told my mom, who was very, very close to me, she's just been the main person behind my support. But anyway, I told her, I said, Mom, guess what? I got my check from the Rotary Club. In fact, I didn't ask him for $75. I asked him for $100 because I thought by the time we go there in the travel expense and the man might increase it, I might have to buy light bulbs. So someone told me, you better ask for $100. So the traffic light was $75, but I did ask them for $100. I remember that. So the check was for $100. And I said, Mom, here's what happened. And I told her, and she said, honey, do you think they really gave you the check because they wanted to get the traffic light or just to get you out of there real quick? And so that we chuckled about for a long time. So that was one of the few, not few, but one of the many funny situations. Okay, now back to the Safety Town Council. As I said, it was I did all the work for it. Believe me, lots of work in organizing and calling, because we didn't know how many Safety Town programs. I'd called local police departments to see if they had one, and went from there. But we did meet in the spring of '68 was our first Safety Town. I think it was this was in May of '68. As it states on video, on the video number 1, I had an extremely difficult time trying to work harmoniously with Mildred Now, who was safety director of the Cleveland Automobile Club. And that doesn't mean all AAAs were the same, because as I traveled later on, many of the local AAAs were just fabulous people and couldn't understand why the AAA nationally didn't undertake this project. But as you'll learn later on through both videos what their concerns were. But anyway, what I did when we started the council, I thought, following my belief, and you've got to get publicity, I arranged in the Bedford paper, I went to the Cleveland Automobile Club and had someone go down the course with me, and we took a picture of Mildred Now. I'm holding a layout of the Safety Town, and she's holding the blue book that the Cleveland Automobile Club, I think it was, I don't know if it was just done by the Cleveland Automobile Club or the AAA as well, but it always had the AAA logo, and that was the book that they used from, I think, about 1940 to 1964. Even beyond that, I used it for a couple of years. But that was the book that had 1 or 2 pages, and I have somewhere in either the office in Beechwood or my house, I do have a copy of that, so we'll insert this for later. But it just had a few pages of the theme for the day and so forth, nothing in depth as to what we now have. What I now have is 750 pages and 8 manuals of how to explain to people how to set up the program and do the curriculum and the publicity and training of teenagers. But this was my way of, even though she was very nice to me, of doing nice things for the Automobile Club and for the program too, so that parents were aware of the importance of child safety. Now, throughout the years, I look back now and I don't know how anyone that ever worked for me, especially Jacqueline Herdlicka, could understand my writings, because I would write, I'd go to a meeting, and if I ran out of paper, I would write on the back of a matchbook cover, the inside of a matchbook cover, and many people said I could write a whole story on the back because I wrote so small, and I would just really scribble things. And some of the papers we saved, the people I worked with always said, you've got to save some of these things, they're just priceless. So here is just one of the sheets of paper. As I said, I never wrote out things, I just wrote out topics. And this was for a Safety Town Council meeting, and I just have minutes. And I thanked the council and had Fred Pappenfuss give a presentation. This was in 1969, this particular one was. I'm sorry, 1970. Then I had Frank Beck talk and various things. But I would just have the highlights and then go from there, as you're saying right now. My first not presentation, it wasn't, well, I did make a presentation, but it wasn't a planned presentation. It was just off the record type situation. In 1968 was my first national conference I attended in Chicago. It was a National Safety Congress. That was exciting for a couple of reasons. Again, some funny things, excuse me here. The little throat gets dry once in a while. When I found out about this, about the National Safety Congress, I was so excited. I said, oh, I've got to go to this thing. So, of course, I paid my own expense. I went there. I took a video that my teens had made for me. Again, I say video, I'm sorry, it was a 16mm movie, because I used it to go around to various communities to talk to people about Safety Town. And I carried this big 16mm projector with me in my luggage. I mean, it was really difficult. And I took it in my hotel room, and any time I found anyone interested, and I did this for several years, at any meeting, any convention I went to, whether it was in Washington, D.C., or New York, or Chicago, or Philadelphia, or wherever it was, I would take this and set this up in my hotel room. If I found someone interested in Safety Town, I would say, I've got this film in my room. Would you like to come up to my room and see my film? See? Of course, I always had to, I should have always said Safety Town, but they knew about it, but I just said, would you like to come up and see my film? And some people would give me reactions. Well, now I've heard all kinds of offers, but that's the first time I've heard to come and see a film. But it was funny, and it was. I was just so excited about doing it, and I know I had limited time, so I talked very, very fast, and because of that, I left out words in between, and that's why I said I would leave off these tail endings, assuming that the people knew what I was thinking, and they didn't. I remember one time I did a workshop. It was, I think, in North Carolina, one of the southern states, and I said at the beginning, I'm here for 8 hours to do a seminar, and I'm going to try to give you all my years of experience and knowledge and information in about 8 hours. So I have a tendency to talk fast. And the lady in the front row said, oh my gosh, And I said, please stop me, and I'll be happy to explain anything if you feel I'm not explaining it properly. So through the years, I've learned to talk a little slower, but I still have a tendency to do that. But anyway, I found in our files these two receipts from the hotel where I stayed. It was a Hotel Lincoln in Chicago, Illinois, on October 29th and 30th, 1968, and the hotel room bill at that time was $13.36. Now, I don't even know if Hotel Lincoln is still in existence there, but I thought that was a fun thing to have. Now, in 1968 at that conference, I was able to hear many, many excellent speakers. And I do want to say at that Congress, I was so impressed by the large number of people. There were, I think, approximately 15,000 people. And there were various hotels. Each hotel took in a different aspect of safety. The Knickerbocker Hotel at that time, later went on to be the Playboy Towers, but the Knickerbocker Hotel was on driver education and school and college section. There was nothing, nothing for elementary or preschool safety education. Then we went on to, then another hotel had police department work, another one had industrial. A lot of them were on industrial safety because that's what the safety council was on industrial safety. So as I said, there were 7 or 8 hotels, and I would go from one hotel. I would look through this huge program and go from one meeting to another, maybe something in the police department, at maybe the PIC Congress, and I would either walk or take a cab from these places. And many times, I would not even eat lunch or dinner. I would take a box of Ritz crackers or cheese, also for financial reasons. Would eat in my hotel room. Maybe that's why I stayed skinny in my early years, I don't know. But one of the speakers was John Furbay. I think this was in 1968. And this man, I have some of his records. He was just an excellent speaker. And he said something that I thought was so interesting. I have his records at home, a few of his records I purchased. He said that so often many people are like little bugs in the rug. He said they're so comfortable in their little space in this rug, they're warm, they're secure, that they never stick their head up out of that rug to see what a beautiful pattern was in that rug, and that they were living in this beautiful, beautiful world and their own community, and they really were so involved in their daily life situation that they stayed in that little bug in the rug type situation. And I used that many times through the years, and I always gave him credit because I thought that was just an excellent correlation of how many people felt at the time. Okay, now 1968, back in December, I was contacted by a lady, and let me get her, I think her picture is in here. No, hold on just a minute, we'll get it here because I want, as I said, this is one of the few times where I'm going to talk about the local ones because I'm going to do that extensively in the video number 3. But I thought I would highlight just the major safety towns, mostly the first safety town that we started in each state, so to speak. So in 1968 was my first presentation, formal presentation I should say, to another community in the greater Cleveland area, and that was in Strongsville, Ohio. Now, in 1966, I think it was, we were fortunate to obtain television coverage. I think it was Channel 8 or Channel 5 in Cleveland. Tom Fields and Dave Buckles came out to do a segment on our Safety Town program. Now, this is 1966. Now, the only reason they came out is one of their, I can't recall which one, but a niece or a nephew of one of the, Tom Fields or Dave Buckle, one of them had someone attend our program. So they came out and watched them on graduation day, and then came out with their crew a few weeks later into the program. And as a result of that, we received, I should say Dr. Brown, our superintendent, received approximately 30 requests within the greater Cleveland area for safety town programs. And the Strongsville was the first one that we went out to, that I went out to with my husband, with Frank, to make a presentation. And the lady responsible for that was also a lady that I had worked with at the Hickby Company, who was one of the models. And this is how I feel that this might in the future help someone. I had no idea. Something I did 10 years ago and had worked with a person 10 years ago was going to be instrumental in something that I was going to do later on in life. And I'm just going to look through here. The lady's name was, I want to make sure I have it right. Hold on. Okay. And the lady who really took the bull by the horns, I should say, and did the financial backing, because she owned a fabric store, was Mrs. Donald Babbitt, and she was the Women's League safety chairman. And it was Mrs. Charles Johnson, who was the lady that I'd worked with. She was the league's president, and she was the one who had heard about the program, recognized my name, and had me come out there. And here's the picture of Betty Babbix on this side, and Lois, her name was Lois Johnson, on this side, and then myself. And the other two gentlemen are Bruce Johnson. Robert Durrell is here as the teacher and principal of the school, and this was Superintendent Bruce Johnson of the Strongsville school system. So that's how we started Strongsville Safety Town, and that's how we did many of them, many of them, just on an individual basis. And I'm going to read a nice letter that we received December 10th, 1968 from Bruce Johnson, with a copy to Mrs. Betty Babbitt, because she said she was going to undertake and be chairman of the Safety Town program, which I later changed the word from chairman to coordinator. And the reason I did that is I felt chairman was just a little controlling, that I'm the chairperson, I'm going to tell you what to do and you do this. Where the coordinator, I felt, just made the people on my committee, or any committee, feel like you're all coordinating efforts together and working together. So that's why we named our people coordinators and not chairman or chairpersons, as some people did later on. But this was the letter from Bruce Johnson. Dear Mrs. Schlatt, thank you for your presentation on Safety Town this morning. It was very enjoyable and provided us with the information needed to get a similar program underway in Strongsville. We appreciate your taking your time to be with us today. Now, a nice situation about Strongsville that we later found out when we went there to, in 1969, to open the program, to cut the ribbon. One of the people in attendance was Dale Finley. Dale Finley was mayor of Strongsville. He was also in the JCs with my husband, and we knew him from way back. And he was so excited about the program, and he said to me, Dorothy, this is the first time in this community that I can remember when anyone came to these Safety Town meetings, and he said, I attended several of them. He said, we didn't have the Republicans sit on one side and the Democrats sit on the other side. He said, everybody was working together on this project. And he said it was a great, great feeling to see. And I was excited about that. And that's really what it did, is it brought the community together, because we were working towards the one goal, and that was to help prevent accidents to our children. And Dale Finley later went on to become president of the Cleveland Convention Center for many, many years. Very, very nice man. In 1969, we moved from Bedford Heights to Solon, Ohio. And I didn't do anything the first year as far as setting up a program in Solon. What I did do, of course my husband got on the school board in Solon, and through his efforts we arranged to bus children from Solon to the Bedford facility, to use the school buses and to bus them to the Bedford facility, because there really wasn't enough time to set up the program in Solon. So we arranged to do that. And we all met the children at Roxbury School. I took care of all the newspaper publicity, explaining the program to as many organizations and people as I could. We put registration forms in the newspaper, registered the children at PTA. But every day we would meet the children at Roxbury School in Solon, and we would bus them then over to Bedford, and we would teach them at the Bedford facilities. And I was delighted to do that. I think we did that for a month. We had one session for 2 weeks and then another session for the following 2 weeks. I was very upset one time because when we arrived at Roxbury School to pick up the children, it was raining, and I opened the school door, elementary school door, to have the children just get inside the hallway so they wouldn't be in the rain. And the doors were locked. So when I got back from that day, our poor little children were just soaking wet. We tried to hide as much as we could under the little roof coverings, but we still got wet. So I went to the superintendent and I said, I went to the principal when I got back and said, I'd like to, could we have the doors open in the morning so our children could wait outside? And he said, well, my floors will get all dirty, and we just don't want the children running around through here. And I said, they're not going to run around, they're just going to be in this small little hallway. Well, this is the time we clean the floors, and I don't want them all dirty. I was furious. I then went to the superintendent of schools, who was Dr. Paul Zdanowitz. And I said, Paul, who runs the school system? Does the principal run it, or do you and the school board run this? And I said, I can't believe that we're going to have our children here in Solon stand out in this rain instead of being in this school, because one man says that in this little hallway, if they're going to get some raindrops. I said, we'll come in and clean it afterwards. So after that, we were able to do it. But you always have to go through these situations to get anything done. And Paul Zdanowitz was a wonderful, wonderful man. Some people in the community didn't like him because he was very firm, but I think that's what we needed in many communities. So the following year in Solon, I didn't do anything because I was still very involved in the Bedford program. It was the fall of, I believe it was 69, when someone contacted me in the community and said, we really need a Safety Town program here in Solon like you have in Bedford. And I said, well, you have to, organize it. I can help you, but I can't teach all of them throughout the country. I'm only working in Bedford. So, again, my husband being in the JCs, we went to the Solon chapter. He went to the Solon chapter. And at this time, this was 1969, he was president of the Solon JCs. I'm sorry, he was not president. He was vice president of the Ohio chapter of the JCs. District vice president was his exact title. I'll get it straight. District vice president. And he went to Solon for his first meeting as district vice president, and he had to observe the chapter and make a report. And I guess the first order of business from the Solon JCs was they wanted to disband the chapter because they didn't have enough members, they didn't have activities to do. At which point, my husband, now I wasn't there, this is what my husband told me. At which point he said, he stood up and said, gentlemen, before you discuss this, I would like to make a recommendation that you undertake a project that we've been doing in Bedford for many years, and we did a year ago here in Solon when we transported the children to Bedford. It's called Safety Town. We can involve the community and involve the corporations and so forth. And rather than doing just the Easter egg hunts, which were nice for the children, but he said that's something that the women's group can handle, and we can start working on some very worthwhile programs for the community involving the corporate world as well. And at that time, a lot of women weren't involved in the corporate field, so that's why the men really had to do this. So he got them interested in this, and they were, I guess, semi-interested. They didn't disband the chapter. So the next few days, I went into Sam Baker's barbershop. I have to recall this because this has been many years ago. And I said, Sam, I want to get on that program and talk about Safety Town to the children, to your members about the program for the children. So he arranged for me to come to a meeting. I did not know when I went into that meeting with Frank that they had canceled a meeting that the Solon JCs were going to go and visit a brewery which was going to offer them free beer. So at the start of this meeting, they weren't too receptive until I found out about this, and I told them, I said, look, I found out now just recently that you were going to go to this brewery, and you're not too happy about me being here with my husband. We'll buy you each a beer afterwards. Please stay and listen to what I have to talk about. So that's how we got Solon Safety Town off the ground. Cost us some money to buy some beers, but that's you have to do what you have to do. Now, at that meeting, there was a young man by the name of Richard White. Upon completion of the meeting, he came up to me. He was from North Canton. And he said, gee, we don't have anything like this in North Canton. I'm interested in doing something about that. And he also said to me, is this program, I don't know if he was an attorney or what, but he said, is this program copyrighted? And I said, well, gee, I don't know, but I said, I work with the AAA because we've been doing the Safety Town Council. And I said, I'll check with them, see if there's been anything done in the earlier years, because I didn't know of anything. And as it explains on the video, on video number 1, the various problems were involved with that, because I did not have the money to copyright or do anything. And when I went to, again, Mildred Now and asked about the copyright, she said that she would take care of it and pay for it. And I did not know that years later it would come back to haunt us, because she copyrighted it in another organization's name. And in the late 70s we had some financial, financial but legal problems with that. But that was just unbelievable how it all transpired. But her concern was, I guess, the AAA, and that really was so difficult for me to understand, because I wanted to give the program to them. Please take it, do something with it. I didn't want to do this the way I had to do it. Didn't have the money, constantly, scraping for every buck, borrowing money, getting loans, and yet she wanted her name. She wanted her name and the AAA's name on it, but yet they didn't want to be involved. It was so difficult for me to understand what the whole situation was about. So I just kept my blinders on some of these things. Just kept the blinders on for children, and some of these other things I just said, whatever comes will come. And unfortunately, sometimes you have to nip these things in the bud, or else they blossom out, and some of these things did. But anyway, this man, Richard White from North Canton, asked about that question. And then later, went back to organize North Canton Safety Town, and on February 15th, 1969, he sent me this letter. I became quite interested in the Safety Town program after hearing your comments and watching a film on the project in Solon last Monday evening. As I told you, I would discuss the project on an informal basis with the North Canton JC Board of Directors. It was advised to invite you and your husband to the next meeting on March 11th, 1969 at the office in North Canton. This is I'm reading just the way it's worded here, folks. You may plan to be there around 8 p.m. and Mr. William Lota, L-H-O-T-A, president of our organization, stated that your presentation could be made at any time. This will enable you to be through in a convenient time for your return to Solon. I estimated the time required as being 20 to 30 minutes. If you would write a few facts on paper concerning yourself, I would be pleased to introduce you to the North Canton JC Board of Directors. We do not have facilities for a hanging projector screen, but if there is anything else you may need for the presentation, please advise. So we had to take our own projector and our own screen to do things. But that is how the situation in North Canton after the initial project, after the initial meeting in Solon. Now, that was February 15th. On March 12th, 1969, after I had made the presentation in Solon, which was on February 14th, we had our first meeting in Solon in the administration building at 8 p.m. And in attendance was Don Baker. It was Don Baker, not Sam Baker, I'm sorry. Don Baker from Baker's Barbershop. Myself, Police Chief Paul Leffel, Dr. Richard Marshall, who was the veterinarian in town, Lieutenant Eugene O'Quincy, who was with the police department, Ron Paul, who was a JC member, and Dr. Paul Zdanowitz. We were, excuse me, we were all in attendance for this meeting. And I always had to laugh anytime we had a meeting, and I'll show you this here. And this came from the superintendent's office. He added the titles of, or the association of each person, and after my name, he always had Sparkplug. And I thought that was quite cute. But we always had to, keep selling the program and keep selling people. But the routine of business was help we needed for 15 minutes every morning to set up the program, who was going to store it for the winter months, who was going to meet with the instructors. Of course, I ended up doing that. Estimate enrollment was 160 children. Maximum kindergarten projection for that year was 230, so we always received at least, I would say, in most communities I would tell people expect at least 50 to 60%, but in many communities we reached 80, 85% of children enrolling at Safety Town who were going to be enrolled in kindergarten, which is an excellent percentage. Then we had to discuss the schoolroom that was needed and so forth. So these are, again, I had to sit down and make the itinerary for these people. They weren't familiar with it, so it took a great deal of time. While I was doing this, I was also involved in the community in various aspects. I was safety chairman of the PTA, and I attended the state Ohio PTA convention, and briefly gave a presentation, and again came back, did publicity, and I know this is a very poor copy, but there is a picture of myself, and it is the, let's see, Mrs. shown with James Adam, who was safety chairman of the National PTA, and the other lady was Mrs. Avery Schwab, who was safety chairman of the Ohio PTA. So we had the local, I was the local Safety Town chairman, the state one, and the national one, and came back and put that in the newspaper again to help promote safety and Safety Town. Continuing with the publicity, and as I said, we have boxes of newspaper articles at home, which I will incorporate into video number 3 with the local programs. But this beginning publicity was so important because it was so difficult to get. This is April 3rd, 1969. Again, I always like to involve police officers and community leaders, and this was Bedford Fire Chief L.R. Miller, and we're looking at some safety posters about fire. And again, I utilized him to get some publicity with the program and give their fire department credit, which they well deserved. And here is another excellent, this was a full page publicity in the Bedford Times Register on Safety Town and what we did. Maybe I should pull that here, okay? I know this is on autofocus, so I know it's going to take a while to do. Okay. This letter I received from the National Congress of Parents and Teachers, the National PTA. Dear Mrs. Schladd, I am very much interested in your safety program called Safety Town, which you described in your recent letter. After attending that meeting, let's see, when that meeting was in March, I believe, then I followed up with information. They told me that the National Safety Chairman told me to contact the National PTA President and send information. So again, I worked on a packet and sent it out to him. Mrs. Herndon may be interested in considering this program for reference in developing her plan of work. I regret that the program for our convention in Cleveland has long since been planned down to the last minute, and there's no spare minute into which we can fit anything, even so worthwhile a project as yours. I hope you will come to the convention, and perhaps there will be an opportunity to describe the program informally to individuals you meet there or to one of the groups in which you might participate. Now, that is so important because that's how so many of my presentations took place. I could not get on the actual program, whether it was lack of time or lack of interest, but I would attend the meeting. I would stand up in any session and talk about, somehow find the most opportune time to say, what you're talking about is something I'm working on and something we're doing, and slowly add it into the topic of whatever that meeting was. I remember one time in Washington, D.C., going to a program called Environmental Design on placement of signs, overhead signs and side signs. It would take 2 seconds or so to read an overhead sign compared to reading a side sign where your eye would have to go from here to here to back to the wheel. All sorts of wonderful research, and I loved all the meetings I went to. Some were boring, of course. Some speakers, I could not stand speakers who got up there and said, now we will talk at the same time and not move. And the time, I was always told when you're a speaker to stand at the podium and stand erect and don't move. Well, I couldn't do that. I had to walk around. I had to use my hands. It's hard now for me to sit here and do this and I had to use different types of gestures and change my voice because that's how I felt at different times. Excuse me again. Very good. I think that's Diet Pepsi or Diet Coke, one of them. I want to give them both credit. So I would go to these meetings and at the appropriate time get up and talk about safety, and that's what I did in this meeting in Washington. They were talking about environmental designs and the safety of the driver, whether, as I said, from the vision standpoint, and the police officer said, it doesn't matter. There were several police officers that talked, and they said it's important to teach. It's important to have environmental designs and have a safe car, but you have to teach that person behind the wheel how to speak, how to react to situations, especially children. And I'm not going to talk anymore about this now because that's explained on video number 1, but these were situations where I had to take advantage of it and get up and say, we can be of help. Okay? In 1965, when I introduced the new concept of Safety Town, and as I said, we had to call it that to make a differentiation from the old one, which you'll learn from watching that video number 1 and watching this one, had a bad taste in the mouth with the AAA and some other people in Washington, and as I said, it was difficult to understand why, but that's the way it was. So I was told to add and say the new concept of Safety Town, and I also like to refer to it as the total comprehensive program because it included all Safety Town, all aspects of safety into the program. So this is the first. My first, let me see how many pages there are, 20 pages of, it says, the new concept of Safety Town, a safety education program for preschoolers by Dorothy Schlatt. And I'm not going to go into details with that, but this is what we had to discuss and explain. Okay. I'm back. We'll have to do a little splicing in between there, but I had to take a few minutes to go to the bathroom and have something to drink. Okay. Actually, I had to refill my coffee, my Diet Coke, my Diet Pepsi Coke drink. Okay, I left off with the discussion of the new concept of Safety Town. Now, I want you to try to remember, and I'm sure you probably can interweave all this together, But while I was concentrating and working on the program for the children, I was doing all types of research. I was starting, this was in I started, as I said, in '64, because I wanted to add more than just traffic safety. I wanted to add total safety. So I watched children, observed children on buses, in department stores, at playgrounds, just anywhere and everywhere. I took notes and had all these boxes all over the place, all over the house. But while I was doing that, I was still writing letters and going out making presentations and doing all sorts of things, including writing presentations to corporate people to sponsor a Safety Town Resource Center. That's what I wanted. I wanted one local place where anyone could write for information, and of course I wanted it nationally because we were getting information and inquiries from people across the country. So here is just a very brief form of what I wrote on for the Safety Town Resource Center. Excuse me. Okay. Operational functions. How to promote the program, what we would be doing, speaking at conventions and arrange displays and radio and TV work. Number 2, provide information and materials for the teacher, for the police officer, for the instructors, and so forth. Number 3, to provide visual aids, and to develop visual aids and new methods of instruction. The flannel board presentation that I did. I made a puppet presentation. I wrote some songs and some poems, not songs per se, but just, you know how you sing to kids, not songs to be published on the top 10 or anything of that type. And art projects. Number 4, to publish a quarterly pamphlet to personnel. This was so important. To provide a newsletter on the latest materials that were available from various communities. Whoever came up with a new idea on a coloring book or whatever, let's inform all other people about it. And questions and answers, and where to obtain information materials. And arrange and conduct, and this is one thing I've always wanted to do, unfortunately still haven't been able to do, is to arrange and conduct 1 week a 40-hour training session for the teachers and police officers involved. I thought this was so important because there was no actual training of child development as relates to safety capabilities, which has always been my big important issue. I guess you want to refer to it as that. Then to keep statistical records, because a lot of communities wanted to know after the Safety Town program, was there a reduction of accidents in the community. Now, I got so frustrated every time anyone would ask me about that. And it got increasingly worse as I went into Washington in large communities. But and the first few times I was asked this, I was just so amazed because I couldn't understand how you could compare safety education to a statistical, put it in that type of a category, because we were teaching children on how to develop attitudes and how to form habits at an early age. And yet they were doing it to driver's education, how many accidents were there for 16 to 24-year-olds. And I'm saying, wait a minute, there's something wrong with this. So I said, why can't we compare this as educational? Put it in the same category as math, English, history, science, any other subject. And I can remember in our nursery school classes, when my children came in, the first thing we would do is teach them numerals. After that, we would teach them basic single-digit addition, and then subtraction, and double-digit, and so forth. And we would go in sequential order. And I said, this is how I looked. In my brain, this is how I looked upon safety education in Safety Town. All we were doing is doing that introduction. We were showing them about the street, showing them the traffic light, introducing them to various aspects, but we weren't saying to do it by themselves. you know, that we still had mom and dad to do with, and that's a slow transfer. It might take many years, maybe 4, 5, 6 years with some children before they can handle us on their own. And so it was difficult. So finally, one time in Washington, I was able to make the comparison, and I said, look, well, the comparison explanation. I said, look, all they were concerned about is the bottom line. I said, that's all I want to see is the bottom line. And I'm telling you that last year in Cleveland, Ohio, and I can't recall the specific year this was, might have been 70, 71, something of that type. I'm a little ahead of schedule here. But I know there were 3 children killed going to school. They were walking on the sidewalk, and a drunk driver jumped the curb and killed those 3 children. Now, number one, bottom line, there was certainly an increase in accidents in Cleveland the next year. Now, the next thing, even if they went through Safety Town, and I don't know if they did or not, we never did that investigation. They couldn't have, they didn't have a Safety Town in Cleveland at that time. But had they gone through Safety Town, I think one of the first things these people would have said is, gee, Safety Town's not effective. Look, there's an increase even though these children went to Safety Town. Yet it had nothing to do with the children's ability. A drunk driver jumped the curb and killed these 3 children. So that's why I was so upset, and I put very little emphasis, and I always squelched anytime anyone asked me, oh, has this program been proven statistically successful? And I would go into that little blurb I just did, because it would just upset me tremendously, because that's not what the whole program, this is an educational program. However, I do want to say that yes, it has prevented many, many, many accidents. How do we know this? Some schools kept some little statistics in their elementary schools. They put a little mark on the child's card, and if they had an accident, if they attended Safety Town and so forth. A few communities I know told me they did this. We had letters from parents. We had articles in newspapers where a child who went through the program took a bottle of open aspirins away from their younger brother and sister, where they took matches away or cigarette lighters away from their younger brother or sister. One you hear about later on in Michigan, where the boy actually pulled his sister out of a burning house. He and his sister were the only ones in the house, and he pulled her out even though she was crying and screaming. But he was 5 years old and she was 3 years old, and possibly saved her life. And when they asked him, he said, that's what they told me to do at Safety Town, to get out of the house. So these are the things that we know have prevented accidents, but it wasn't enough for the people in some local communities, whether it be the mayor, the superintendent, and it certainly wasn't enough in Washington. And I cannot begin to tell you the number of times I was thrown out of superintendent's office, chiefs of police offices in my own community. In Bedford, when I was setting up the program, I went to the chief of police in Bedford at the time, and I say his name and I can't recall it offhand, but he said, I gave the presentation in his office, just the 2 of us, and when I completed, I said, what do you think? And he looked at his watch and he said, you have just wasted 20 minutes of my day. I was very upset, needless to say. So I went to Bedford Heights to the police chief, Dominic Muty, who was a sweetheart. And because Bedford Heights was the 4 communities, he provided the police officer, and then I worked with the Bedford fire chief, who was very nice, and used the Bedford Fire Department because we had to use all 4 communities. It wasn't easy, believe me, folks, even on a local level. But okay, getting back to this. So after keeping the statistical records, we also asked in this resource center that we wanted to keep a file on every Safety Town, to provide general assistance and guidelines to communities and to the teachers, to seek information. The director would work with all safety organizations in obtaining information, Highway Safety Foundation, the Highway Federation, Safety Federation, and to coordinate one-day group discussions. In general, what I was talking about is to expand the Safety Town Council. Instead of just doing it for Cleveland, let's do it for various communities as well. Now, let me explain here also. And as I said, I'm going to do these things as it comes to my mind. There's no script other than notes in it. One thing I read or start talking about is going to trigger off something else in this loaded brain. We started that safety council under the auspices, so to speak, of the Automobile Club. And we did a few of the meetings, and then we wanted to include people from the greater Akron area. And I asked the Cleveland Automobile Club, Mildred now, of course, if we could do this. And she said, no, this is the Cleveland Automobile Club. Akron has their own automobile club. So we had to have meetings just in Akron for the Akron Automobile Club. And I must say Dick Duffy, who was safety director then and I think has gone on to be president now, it has been and continues to be just a strong supporter of Safety Town, was most delighted to work with us in any capacity. That organization, AAA, the Akron AAA, has for many years painted Safety Town, the layout on the blacktop for many of the communities in his district. What a difference between communities. I know people told me when I started to go around and talk to people about starting an organization, national organization in Cleveland to set up. People told me, Dorothy, Cleveland is the worst place to try to get off the ground. They said, some salesmen told me that they can start, if we went to the smallest little town in Montana or Iowa or somewhere else to get established, then come back to Cleveland as an established organization, it would be fine. But to get started in Cleveland was more difficult than New York or Washington or anywhere else. I don't know why. Well, yes, I do know why. I didn't know why at the time. I found that later when I got more involved with the Cleveland people. Cleveland was the only city where you had to be approved by a financial review committee of the Greater Cleveland Growth Association before any corporation would give you money. And I found this out the hard way when we sponsored an event and sent out letters to various corporations saying we were going to have a fun event for the children on movies of Safety Town and have some clowns appear and so forth. And someone called me, one of the corporations, I think it was Ohio Standard Oil or whatever, and said, have you been approved by the Financial Review Committee? Which I had not been, never heard of it. So I had to join the Greater Cleveland Growth Association, pay for an audit because you had to get an audit done, which cost a couple $1,000s, and then finally go out and do it. And I don't think the whole purpose of the event for children was not to raise money; it was just to get them there. We wanted to have children from Parmadale and some of the orphanages and some of the institutions where they kept children that were slightly handicapped and brought to teach them about safety. And so it was just very difficult in Cleveland to get started. Okay, so that was on our seeking the help of various organizations. Then recognition, number 11 on this proposal that I had was recognition of volunteer instructors. I felt that was so important because we had heard for so many years, still do, that teenagers are bad and they do this. And of course, you know, one bad apple spoils the barrel, and a lot of publicity was given to the bad situation instead of all the good. And I couldn't convince, and I guess we still can't convince the media, although they are getting better, to start doing stories on the good things. They said it doesn't sell newspapers, it doesn't sell television time, doesn't sell radio time, so but we are getting much better, being in 1997. So it does take a little while. And I wanted to investigate the possibility of state uniforms for the instructors. This was basically a state proposal for Ohio that I was doing. And it would say Ohio Safety Town Instructor, and then in the front and on the back, each local Safety Town could put their name. No, as I said, we have done this on their National Safety Town Instructor shirts, which we did later. Then we had to go on and write an estimated budget for the equipment, how many typewriters we would need, how many desks, how many file cabinets, what the salaries would be for a secretary and a director, the travel expense, and then list the objects of the program, the purpose, and so forth. Safety education for the teenagers and community involvement. So this I did in addition to writing the curriculum for the children and writing the manual for the local people, in addition to all the other, and of course my family. And again, I mentioned my mother, and I should do a video strictly on my mother. It would be at least a 2-hour video for all the work that she has done for me. I remember going into Washington one time, and she went with me on some of my trips. She was so active, very, very active lady. But she went into Washington with me, and I had a meeting with, I can't recall, I think it was Congressman Vanek. And I had driven round and round and round that Washington area, couldn't find a parking place at all. And it was getting close to my meeting time with him, and I was getting a little concerned. And I had allocated enough time to get there. So after like 3 trips around and not being able to find a parking lot or a parking place that was vacant, there was a parking place between, it was a large building, and it had a large door for truck deliveries were there, and it said no parking. Now, as it would be, there was a policeman or security guard right next to this big stand, and I backed in the car, put it there, and he's watching me. I got out my briefcase, and I said, I know it says no parking. I know there's, this is for a truck, but it's getting late in the day. They probably won't have any more deliveries. I said, the keys in the car. My mother is in the car. I said, I have a meeting at 3:30, I think it was, with Congressman Vanek, or I think it was him. And I have to get to the Rayburn building, or whatever building it was. I think it was Rayburn. And I said, they're in there. My mother's in there. The keys are in there. If you have to move it, if you have to tow it, take them anywhere. But I have to get to my meeting. He laughed, and he said, go ahead, lady, just go. So and my mother was just delightful. And she put up, I said, Mom, I'm going to leave you in the car with the keys. If they come and take it, just tell them, I said, I'll find you. And it was funny. She was just hysterical. But the work that she did with the puzzles and hats, there wasn't anyone who could count those graduation certificates any better. If there was a little speck on them, I would come home and she'd have the ones with little specks here and the ones with bigger specks here, and she would only pass the ones that were perfect from the printers. And sometimes they came just terrible. We had to send many of them back. But she was my tremendous inspector. The television commercial inspector they had to pass on Haynes had to pass inspector number 13. Well, she was inspector 13 and 113 because she was just fabulous, just unbelievable, and helped me. The little money she did have, she's helped me with some travel expenses, and always came over and helped with the children when I was out of town with Frank, and did a lot of the cooking and helped me do the cleaning, and she was just one super lady. Still is. Here, the age of 92 and a half now. She'll be 93 in April, the good Lord willing, and not as active, of course, in the nursing home, having broken her hip last year in February. But still very concerned, doesn't want me to call her all the time because she knows I have a lot to do, and just very, very nice. Let me tell you another situation, my mother, that reminded me. I can't recall the year of this. It was late in the 70s, somewhere in the 70s. Maybe I'll get to the other information with 70s, but she was living on Goodman Avenue in Cleveland on an upstairs of a 2-family house. The people downstairs obviously had some misunderstanding with some people, and I guess they were out for the evening, and whoever the people that were upset with them knew that they were gone. And these, I'm going to refer to them as the bad people, threw in a bomb into downstairs apartment. I don't know whether they thought they were just going to scare the downstairs people or if they thought my mother was gone. But of course, the house caught on, this large 2-family wooden house caught on fire. And one of the neighbors, when it was burning downstairs, was screaming that they thought my mother was upstairs, and it was late in the evening, early night, I guess it was. And fortunately, there was a 17-year-old boy. I never got his name, and I regret to this day because I would have loved to have done something for him. But he went into that burning house, went upstairs, and got my mother out of bed. Her alarm was on, the alarm system was on upstairs, but she never heard it. She slept so soundly. and carried her out of that burning building. Now, she went across the street to her neighbors. It was Tilly, who lived across the street, and they kept her. I did not know. She didn't say anything to me until the very next day. And the reason for that, which she didn't know because I hadn't talked to her, but Frank's dad died on exactly that same day. I'm not sure if it was the same time or not. We'd have to check that. But the same day that happened, Frank's dad died. I think this was in '71. The following day, I was going to appear on Morning Exchange with Jan Jones and Fred Griffith. And Jan Jones had worked over 2 years to get us onto that program. My mother knew I was going to be on television that day. She knew how exciting this was because she was just in the office almost every day with us, working on different things. So she did not call me and tell me about the fire because she didn't want to upset me for the television program. Now, I mean, that's unbelievable. But that's how concerned she was about me and just in people. She would help people. She had letters from anyone who knew my mom closely, that worked with my mom, or just knew my mom. She loved to play cards. Any of her neighbors just knew she was a sweetheart of a lady. And I couldn't help but remember that, as I said, because I think, as I said, I could go on with stories like this, a whole video on my mother. Okay, getting back to this now. In addition to what I said we were doing with all this, with the proposals and so forth, we continued writing articles to newspapers. And this one was called Tots Taught to Toddle Safely. And this was about the Bedford program. And I'm using this because there's a statement here that Dr. Brown used several times. I have used in my manual several times, and have used and will continue to use at my presentations. And he stated, "You'll never know how many lives you have saved by what you have told these children." And he would use this a lot when he would talk to the teenagers at their teen instructor party, or training session, both at the training session and at the party. And he was such a delightful man, extremely, extremely intelligent educator. And he would, at our appreciation party for the teens, which I held most of the time at our house in Cannon Road, which had a lake in the backyard, which is a community lake, but he would personally come and cook the hot dogs for the kids, and they had to be made a certain way. If they couldn't be too brown and they couldn't be not done enough, they just had to be right. And the bad ones he would put on a container, but in a container, just serve the good ones. So that's not only writing additional articles, but some of the information that he did. Now, as we started to get more information and started to speaking to different groups, we had more responses. This one came from a lady, let me check here on the back page. Helen, it looks like Helen N. Tullis, T-U-L-L-I-S. She was Assistant Supervisor of the Maryland State Department of Education. She wrote this letter to Mildred Now. She must have known Mildred Now, I don't know. States, we in the Maryland State Department of Education, where presently the Assistant Supervisor in Pedestrian Safety, are planning a permanent safety town installation in one of the counties of the state. I have given this teaching device much thought over the past 10 years, okay? And have discussed it with my colleague Sam Yakish of the American Automobile Association in Washington, D.C. Now that's probably where she got Mildred Now, because I knew Sam Yakish and probably contacted Mildred Now through that. The other day I had occasion to ask him if he had any up-to-date information concerning the value of these safety towns, particularly in the form of hard facts or statistics, as regards to saving lives saving children's lives of those who've been exposed to a safety town, as opposed to those who have not. He immediately suggested that I write to you as one of the best informed people in the area which I am interested in Ohio, having been involved in the Safety Town program in Ohio. Now, she was involved in the Safety Town program, remember, back in the 30s and 40s and 50s with Mansfield. While I realize the difficulty of proving a negative, it's difficult to read because some of this is very light in having been Xeroxed. A certain number of children, while I realize the difficulty of proving a negative, there are a certain number of children who do not lose their lives in traffic due to a particular cause. I feel nevertheless that there is a possibility that you may be able to supply me with figures which might assist the State Department in justifying the establishment of a safety town. In addition to answering the numbered questions below, I wondered if there is any printed or other material which I haven't mentioned that you might be able to supply me by way of sale, loan, or interchange of information. Okay, the last information I received from your state is dated 1962, and that was the AAA Blue Book. Okay, now here are some of the questions that she asked, and really opened a big can of worms for us, for me. Number one, has there been a study made of the effects of safety towns on the children, their siblings, and parents, which tends to show their traffic experience is benefited in various ways? Now remember, this lady was exposed to the safety town in the early 60s. And, well, I want to say no, excuse me, let me rephrase that. She was exposed to the program, the early program, from 37 through the early 60s, 62 probably, before I became involved with this. And I could understand, I couldn't at that time, but I can understand now, and I understand a few years after I got involved, why some of these old-timers were so reluctant and did not want to have anything to do with Safety Town because they thought of the old image. And the old image to me was very bad. And again, I don't want to discredit Fred Bowles and anyone who worked with it. They were super people. But from an educational standpoint, it was poorly handled, poorly taught. They meant well, believe me, they meant to teach it from their heart, but not understanding that feeling of a child. And again, I have to state that I feel the reason for that is that they were taught by police officers. And back in those days, men didn't work with young children. The women did. It was the women's role. Men told me that in corporations when I went to them. They said I scare the hell out of them talking about child development and preschool safety because that's not what they were involved in. Their wives were involved with that. So they wanted to get me out of their office as fast as they could. So this is the type of lady, type of person, I should say. This lady was the type of person that I had to confront many times when I said, we have this program. Of course, I'm talking about this new exciting program, and they come back with this old one in their mind, and you'll hear more about this a little bit later, and it's also in the video number 1. Okay, number 2, have follow-up studies been done of children through the various grades of schools to compare children accident patterns as between those who participated in safety towns and those who did not? Remember I said earlier some schools, elementary schools, placed a little sticker on the child's card in the office, and if they had an accident, they would see if they attended programs and so forth. And this, because of this paper in 1969, is why I instituted this in some of the schools, or was suggested to it anyway. Some schools could not do it, but we suggested to them, and as I said, it was up to the local community. How many safety towns are there in the state of Ohio? Oh, one thing I forgot to mention about this. Mildred now gave this to me to do. She didn't have any of this information because there was no information, but she gave me this letter to respond to Miss Tellis. Number 4, how many are in cities as opposed to suburbs? 5, are all safety towns summer projects for preschool? If not, how many are school year facilities? How many are summer projects? Number 6, How many children do you accommodate at a time? Number 7, what size group do you find most successful for one instructor to have at a time? Number 8, and that, let me go back to 7 for a minute. I always referred to the teacher as the teacher. The instructors were the teenagers. I did not use the word counselor because many of the teenagers and many of the teachers felt counselors. The word counselor was for day camps and camping of that type. And we wanted this to be looked upon as educational rather than a recreation type facility or activity. Number 8, how often is a child exposed to the Safety Town experience during his elementary school years? Now there again, what I did after reading this, actually even before this I have to say, because some of the parents would come up to me after we graduated children from Safety Town and said, what can we do, or what will the schools be doing to follow up Safety Town experience? They thought the Safety Town experience was great for the kids, but what will we do in the sequential order to continue the safety education? What I told the parents, and I assisted them many times in many communities, I said, let's organize a group of parents. We'll write to the school board, ask permission to speak be on their agenda. We'll go in as a group, very nicely, saying we think our schools are wonderful, that's why we live here. Our children went through the Safety Town program. How can we help you and the teachers get a follow-up program of safety into the classroom? So I started to give all the elementary teachers, kindergarten and first grade teachers, where there were kindergarten programs fine, if not first grade teachers, I would give them a copy of our safety lessons that we taught, and I asked all the directors and the coordinators in their local communities to do the same thing, so the teachers could follow up in some way or other. So a lot of this information, as I said, one thing led to another, and I couldn't stay on one path to go in this direction. I'd worked with corporations on approaching funding, and then something like this came in and I had to go this way and I had to go 20 directions. Not by choice, but because of demand. Okay, that was question number 8. Number 9, how many minutes does a child spend in one instructional period? Number 10, does the normal course consist of more than one instructional period? If so, how many? Are they on consecutive days, or are they on individual visits spaced at intervals? Number 11, what preparation does a child receive before he goes to Safety Town? Number 12, what planned follow-up lessons or activities are regularly scheduled following the Safety Town program, if any? 13, if you have prepared lesson plans for before, during, or after visits to Safety Town, may I please receive copies? Number 14, are your instructors classroom teachers, police officers, or safety specialists? See, she referred to instructors as the teachers. Which do you find most satisfactory? Number 15, do you have assistants for your teaching staff? If so, from what group do you find the most successful ones? Number 16, under what auspices are your Safety Towns operated? Okay, 17, may I have some diagrams of typical layouts? Number 18, what size do you find most functional? Number 19, what size miniature buildings are used in a typical Safety Town? Number 20, what type of vehicles do you find most satisfactory? Tricycles, bicycles, or pedal cars? Number 21, in Safety Town, do you make use of any full-size vehicles such as passenger cars, school, or buses? Thank you for all your help. Please feel free to request any information from me. Okay, now that was given to me. Here I am, one person, with the help of my husband and people in local communities who really didn't care about this because they knew what it was doing in their community. I had a hard enough time selling new communities on the importance. Here's this lady who knew about it but wanted all this data. You'd need a whole department to do this. But I went ahead, answered it, and continued to do the research, and as I said, tried to incorporate that information as to why we needed a national safety town center. And the way I came up with that name is we needed a central place, central location, where anyone in the nation could write into the central place and ask for information. So I took the national and the center and said we need a national safety town center. That's how we came up with the name. Okay. Break time. Okay. Back to the local level. This is a letter, and I think I'm doing pretty well in staying in sequential order with the years and dates. Here and there I sidetrack, but that's me. I'm going to do that. Can't help it. The brain keeps functioning and working. Speaking about the brain keep functioning and working, I've got to tell you, just don't ask me what made me think about this. I'm going to backtrack here for a minute. Remember I said I went to the National Safety Congress in 1968 in Chicago. One thing I forgot to tell you is when I arrived there, now you have to remember I was pretty scared. I didn't know that much about, I knew safety town, but I didn't know safety in general. And it's the first time I ever went away on a national convention or anywhere by myself without my husband. We'd gone to a few local state things and so forth, but I'd gone with some of the gals from PTA. But as far as going by myself on the airplane and getting in a new hotel room by myself, I had not done that. Checked in and all. I had made reservations at the Knickerbocker Hotel, which you saw the receipt. Got in there and looked at, the cab driver took me at the airport, went to Knickerbocker Hotel, looked at the sign, took my baggage, got out of the cab driver, went in through the revolving door, and it was wall-to-wall men. And I said, I've got to be at the wrong hotel. So I took my suitcase and my camera that I had, and I walked right through, right outside again, looked back up at the sign, said Knickerbocker Hotel. And a couple things crossed my mind is, I'm scared. I don't know, these men all looked very scientific, and I said, I'm scared of this. Then the other thing crossed my mind. Now you have to remember, and I hope you have a sense of humor, I was young at the time, and I always was nicely dressed, had my fashion experience, and I thought, Dorothy, you know what? You will probably never get these odds again. Go back there and go to the registration and check in. So I did, and it was funny. The men looked at me, there's no doubt, because they weren't used to seeing a woman at their conventions, because their safety was a man's field.